Today we have Dr. Ryan Baker, and he is a social professor at Teachers College of Columbia University. And already actually heard from some of you actually possible months or years ago, and you know about Dr. Ryan Baker, and here he is. And the reason you possibly know about him because you possibly took his MOOC class, I guess, and he has been very active for the past several years, and in doing some very interesting stuff, okay, data mining and site learning. So he actually is going to bring us some interesting idea and share with us. So today, and he's with us, and let's welcome him to give talk.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. So, some folks here took the MOOC. Oh, great. Well, I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It's okay if you didn't. You know,
I enjoyed it. Yeah.
I won't be talking about the MOOC today in very much detail, but that was a really neat experience. It created a lot of research topics for me, actually, that I've continued to follow up. For example, there was one student who was particularly helpful on the MOOCs, on the forums. It turned out that actually I discovered from giving a talk about a month ago, there was one student who was continually personally attacking me on the forums, and I discovered a month ago I was in Beijing, and I was telling this story, and somebody raises their hand and says, "Was it?" and then they say a name. And it turns out this guy is famous for disrupting all the MOOCs on Coursera and artificial intelligence. So, really interesting experience. Today we talk about some different stuff. Our work to create automated detectors of engagement and affect. I'll talk about what that is. And use them to do long-term and actionable prediction of student outcomes. Please feel free to interrupt me while I go. I like questions. So thank you for welcoming me here today. It's an honor to speak at Texas A&M. I grew up on the other side of Texas, up near Dallas and Denton. But it's always a pleasure to come back to my home state. And I'm excited to have the opportunity to tell you about some of our work to measure engagement in online learning. So, as I'm sure everybody here knows, more and more learning is occurring online every year. And a lot of it's occurring in online learning systems, like, for example, assessments, which assesses while it assists. Assessments is a math tutoring system where students do their homework with a system that gives them feedback and help as they're going. Science simulations like Inkits. Reasoning Mind. Who's familiar with Reasoning Mind? I see a few hands. Reasoning Mind is this great online learning system for elementary school mathematics. Very engaging, really conceptually oriented. Used by about, it's a smart board. Used by about 100,000 kids a year, and it comes from Houston, and it's heavily used in Texas. Multi-user virtual environments, for example, like EcoMove. This is actually VPA, Virtual Performance Assessment, where students learn science content by wandering out in the world, picking up objects, taking them to the lab and studying them, talking to non-player characters. And games like Newton's Playground, where students learn physics concepts by actually drawing stuff and seeing what happens. Some of these systems are used by tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of kids per year, and they create a big impact on the learners. And some of these systems can be very engaging. Part of the reason why people want to make games is because they think it's going to get kids fired up. And engagement matters. It's been shown repeatedly using self-report and field observation to be associated with differences in student outcomes. So students who are really enjoying math and science classes in high school are more likely to go into careers involving that. I'll talk about some of our work later where we show that engagement in middle school math can predict whether you go to college and what you major in when you go to college. But across online learning, there's a lot of variation in engagingness. Some systems, like assessments, which by the way is a really great system in a lot of ways, students experience a lot of boredom. Other systems like EcoMove, students experience very little boredom. So this is an opportunity and a challenge. Can we develop systems that recognize when a student is becoming disengaged and adapt and improve themselves to improve engagement? Can we assess which materials are less engaging to drive redesign? It's not enough to just say some systems are more engaging than others. We don't want to just take the systems that are less engaging and throw them out because a lot of these are very successful in other ways. And can we determine which students are less engaged to provide predictive analytics, where we can figure out who's at risk and why, and intervene, help the teacher intervene to support them. All of this depends on solving a measurement challenge. Who's engaged or disengaged? How are they engaged or disengaged, and when? So how can we do this? The traditional methods, long time tested methods for assessing engagement, include video coding, field observation. I didn't put self-report up here for some reason, but I should have. It turns out that self-report doesn't agree very well with these, and there's a long ongoing debate about whether self-report's the better measure or whether video and field observation are the better measure. It turns out they don't agree with each other very well, but they actually get the exact same results. So in terms of, they both predict the same long-term outcomes. Anyways, these are good methods, but they don't scale particularly well. Self-report can be very disruptive. You can't do it all the time. Video coding and field observation are expensive. It costs a lot of money to have somebody code videos. Who here's familiar with the Measuring Effective Teaching project that was funded by the Gates Foundation? See a couple nods. $60 million to study teacher practices with video coding across hundreds of districts. And that, they get some good findings out of that. But $60 million is not the kind of money we can just drop in to do this kind of stuff on a daily basis. There's also what I like to think of as late 21st century methods like physiological sensors. We can tell if a kid's engaged using webcams, skin conductance sensors, tells them it's sweating, heart rate sensors. Hopefully their heart's racing because of the great instruction, not because of the student next to them. Posture sensors, is the student leaning forward in their chair? EEGs, fMRIs, coming soon to a classroom near you. This stuff works pretty well, but it's really hard to embed in schools. It's expensive, stuff breaks. Wynn Burles and a colleague of mine at NYU put out a full sensor suite to schools in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and had a 60% breakage rate per day. Now webcams are a little more hardy than that, but still, kids break stuff. I've seen kids rip out CD players in computers. And actually, you guys had Sydney DeMello out here, right? You guys had Sydney? You know, they've had a lot of problems even in their lab studies with keeping their posture sensor chair running. Like, there are now there's a company that's making galvanic skin response bracelets for use in this kind of stuff. They folded it, went out of business, and now another company's doing it. This stuff's hard to do. And there's political challenges. There was like a big thing in the media about 9 months ago where leftist bloggers like Leonie Hameson and right-wing pundits like Glenn Beck were unifying to attack the very idea of physiological sensors in classrooms. So there's a lot of challenges to sensors. So one of my questions is, can we detect engagement solely from student interactions with software? We're not going to wire up kids with lots of stuff. We're just going to see what they're doing online, see if we can infer the same stuff. So our group's answer is to combine the flexibility and power of educational data mining and machine learning with the best possible ground truth labels, and I'll talk about what that means. But basically, we're going to get good assessments of kids' engagement, and we're going to map it to logs and use data mining and machine learning to try to develop measures that, first of all, are automated. They're able to make assessments about students in real time with no human in the loop. We have to have some human being like sitting there and coding whether the kid's bored or not. It's going to be expensive. It actually turns out that in some of our work in India, we actually developed a method for very low-cost field collection of this kind of data, and it's actually significantly cheaper there to have human beings do it than to get the computer infrastructure in. But in America, it's really expensive. Fine-grained models, able to make assessments about students at a second-by-second level. And validated, demonstrate to apply to new students and new contexts. So we want models that we can get really fine-grained data on, and we want those models to be reliable for totally new students. So let me step back. I've thrown the word of engagement around a lot, but I haven't really talked about it in detail. And that's in part because it's what Corno and Mandana call an elusive variable. There's a lot of perspectives on engagement in the literature. Fredericks and colleagues refer to behavioral engagement, your behaviors that show if you're engaged or not. Are you off task? Are you, for example, texting on your cell phone while watching a talk? Cognitive engagement. Are you paying attention cognitively? Emotional or affective engagement. Is a student excited, bored, frustrated? Our frame is to look at behavioral engagement and emotional or affective engagement. Early work on behavioral engagement tended to focus primarily on whether a student was on task or off task. But work since then has begun to consider the multiple ways that disengagement or engagement can manifest itself behaviorally, which is a tradition that we follow. We do it from log files again. We infer student engagement from their interaction with the learning software. And we model a bunch of constructs. First, off-task behavior. When a student completely disengages from the learning environment and the task to engage in unrelated behavior. This is not just something that's simple, because for example, folks who are in this room right now looking at their computer screens might be off task, but they might be taking notes about the great idea that the lecturer gave. Or they might be emailing their friend to say, hey, I just heard this great idea that's relevant to your research. So you have to kind of see the whole context. You can't just see the specific behavior in isolation. But for example, an off-task behavior might be talking to another student about the band 1Direction. If you went out to a middle school about 18 months ago, that was all they were talking about. And if you go out today, it's again all they're talking about because they just put out a new album. I have a 6-year-old daughter. By the way, talking to a teacher about math, that's not off-task, right? It's not just if you're not using the software, it's what you're doing. A student might be reading a magazine about 1Direction. They might be surfing the web to read blog posts on 1Direction. Perhaps playing an online 1Direction video game. Or the student might be sleeping, although, given our current middle schools, students are probably dreaming of 1Direction. There's also gaming a system that's intentionally misusing educational software to complete problems and advance without learning. That includes behaviors like systematic guessing. Like, let's say a student has to do a math problem, and they type in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, every time wrong. Finally, you get to 38, which is the answer, and they can move on. That student got the right answer, but they probably didn't demonstrate knowledge of the math. Or let's say a system has multiple levels of hints. Each level of hint will give you another hint until it gives you the answer. And the student goes, hint, 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 hint. Get the answer, type it in. Hint, 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 hint. Get the answer, type it in. Careless errors. Making errors despite knowing the relevant skills or concepts. So if someone in this room adds 2 plus 2 and gets 22, you probably know what 2 plus 2 is. If you multiply 7 times 9 and get 42. What we call WTF behavior. It stands for without thinking fastidiously. Any other associations are coincidental, I assure you. The student is actively participating in the learning task. They're not off task, they're not gaming, but they're in a fashion not targeted towards successfully completing the task. Like, for example, this student was supposed to be plotting points for a function, and they plotted a smiley face. The reason why we call it WTF behavior is because when you're coding data, you look at it and you go, WTF. Affect, emotion and context. We look at engaged concentration, positive focused concentration towards the task. So Csikszentmihalyi talks about the construct of flow. This is the emotion associated with flow, but we don't adopt all the theoretical baggage associated with it. Like, Csikszentmihalyi talks about challenge and ability must be matched, and you lose track of the sense of time and hours pass. It doesn't have to have all that. It's just the sense of really strong positive engaged concentration. Boredom, frustration, confusion. So our method for making these models is 2 steps. First, we're going to get human assessments of engagement and disengagement. We get human beings to rate when the kids are engaged or disengaged. We're going to synchronize it at a 1/7 grain size to log files from the educational software. Then we're going to use data mining to develop models that can replicate those human judgments using just the log files. So in step 1, we use human beings, so that in step 2, we can throw them out. We don't want to have human beings necessary the whole time. We want to get to a place where we can tell whether a student's engaged or disengaged just from the logs, comparably to a human. We're not actually quite as good as a human, but we try to go in that direction. Any questions about the big picture before I go on? Okay. So first step, obtaining ground truth, field observations. We use field observations rather than video coding because it's just a hell heck of a lot faster. it's like a factor of 2, factor of 4. There have been a few studies trying to compare them. They're not entirely consistent, but they all agree. With observations, you get way more data per time. And the interreliability is about the same. So we use what's called the Prompt protocol, which is a protocol designed to reduce disruption to the student. I'll show you a video of that. So some features of the protocol, the big key is to see what kids are doing by observing their behavior and their context without changing them, while creating the minimal observer effects. So for example, we observe with peripheral vision or side glances. You've got a very neutral expression right now. After that you nodded, now you're not nodding. We hover over a student not being observed. So if I'm observing you, I'm going to be hovering over here. We do 20-second round-robin observations of a bunch of students. So we're not just standing over one student. And we try to look bored and unhappy while we do it. That's actually really important because nobody wants to look at somebody who looks unhappy. You look like you're angry at your phone, no one wants to look at you. And that actually really helps. We don't actually go as far, like Fenema et al. 25 years ago or so, recommended that people actually are rude to students who talk to them while they're doing observations. We're not rude, we're very polite, but we're just not happy to be there. We do it with an Android app called Heart. It's on my phone right now. It's on my webpage. Anybody who wants to use it, feel free to download it. If you want training in it, it's a 2-day training procedure. We can get you trained. We have several Brock certified coders in Houston, so it'd be really easy to get folks trained here. We currently have 129 Brock certified coders, with the bare majority, just over half being in India. The city of Chennai in India is actually scaling up a program to have a Brock coder in every single school in the city. And they're going to use them not to create detectors, but to actually get formative data on which curricula are working better. Yeah?
No iPhone app?
It turns out that iPhone app development is a lot more expensive than Android app development. Creating the app and modifying it and improving it over time has been somewhere in the realm of $15,000, $16,000 so far. The estimates I've gotten from folks on my team is that an iPhone app would have been significantly more. If you know someone who wants to create one, we're happy to have an iPhone version. It just, we don't have the money to do it. It's I wish iPhone was easier to develop on. I mean, with an Android, I can literally download the app, install it on my phone in 5 minutes. With iPhone, I'd have to do it over the Apple Store, because installing developer apps is really hard, and it's designed to not let you do it. They die after a certain amount of time, and it would be actually the fact that we can just post updates to my webpage is a big advantage over having to get the Apple Store. But yeah, I wish I could have all platforms. Interior reliability is a Cohen's cap around 0.8 for behavior, 0.65 for affect. So for emotion, we're about 65% better than chance, which only a couple of video coding of emotion studies have actually reached that point. It's really pretty hard to do that with video. You'd think it'd be easy, but it's hard to get the camera in just the right place to see all the things you want to see. Folks who've gotten that level of quality for video stuff have typically had multiple cameras pointing at different things. Sydney DeMello, who we had out here, is one of the few people who've done that. So you can't quite see this, but if you could see it, you'd see that she's orienting her body this way, but looking this way. This is one of our this is our head Bronx trainer in India. And it's not really working very well either. So we're going to momentarily turn off the lights on the back. Okay, I'll turn them back on in a sec. So watch my eyes. I'm watching this student, not this one. I can use this one because if you notice, I looked for like 1 second at the person right in front of me. Not even a second, like a half second at the person right in front of me. I had a micro glance at the person in front of me, but I did everything I could to make it look like I was going a different way. Most of what I could see through peripheral, but I wanted to look at them briefly. Another question people ask is, can you really tell when a student is bored? This is a group of, one more second. I'll show one more video and then I'm sorry, thank you. One more video. Can you really tell when a student's bored? This is a group of people involved in education, not computer scientists. So I'm guessing you guys buy this, but let me just show you a video and see if you can tell. Watch this fellow. Is he tired? Look what he does now. Look how he's shifting around trying to avoid looking at the screen. That's how you can tell he's bored rather than just tired. So you have to you can't just watch for like 2 seconds, right? Now you can turn the lights on again. Thank you. This is why it takes more than just 2 seconds to do this. You kind of have to get a good holistic impression. We use a holistic coding scheme as compared to, say, Ekman's facial action coding scheme, which they look for eyebrow raises and stuff, because actually we get better inter-rater reliability that way. Human beings are good at telling somebody's emotion is most of them. When you're looking at somebody in your own culture and you don't have any specific factors that make you unable to see emotion, the average human being can tell if someone's bored. Those of you who've taught to classes know you can tell which students are bored if you're paying attention to them. Human beings don't typically look at eyebrow raises in isolation and such. So once we've got those field observations, and we get a bunch of them, we build automated detectors. We synchronize the log data to the field observations from the phone. We distill meaningful data features for the learning environment based on a qualitative study of the log files, experience of the field observers, and past experience of their data sets. We develop automated detectors using classification algorithms. We validate the detectors for new students, new lessons, and new populations. Let me ask you a quick question because I wasn't entirely sure about my audience. How many folks in here have like experience doing data mining or cognitive modeling or something? Okay. So I won't go into all the detail on that aspect of this. I'll focus more on some of the implications and uses. But basically, just to briefly say a few words, we have a really intensive process. A lot of people think data mining is just you use the magic algorithm and it gets you a great result. We spend months and months and months distilling our data, engineering our data. We are as much cognitive modelers as we are data miners. That, by the way, is our group has been able to get more successful models of this stuff than other groups. And I attribute that to the fact that we spend so much time, months and months and months working on it. We have pizza parties where we get the whole lab together to work on this stuff. We have intensive cycles. We use the IDEO process for brainstorming. We do structured interviews of our field coders. I mean, we go all out. It's a ton of work. And I won't go into much of the detail on the kind of stuff we distill. It really does matter. If you actually involve domain experts in the generation process, you get better models. Luc Paquette, our postdoc in my lab, has been doing some stuff at actually integrating cognitive modeling methods very formally into our process, formal knowledge engineering methods from the Feigenbaum style stuff from the 90s. And it's made us able to take stuff we've been working on for years and make it 20% better. We use simple, standard data mining algorithms. We spend all those months fancy feature engineering, and then the data mining algorithms we use is off-the-shelf stuff from the early 80s. That stuff tends to work a little better than the really modern stuff, because the modern trends in data mining and machine learning are for Google-scale data, and our data is not Google-scale data. We assess the models. I will go into a little detail here. We assess the models using 2 metrics, but the main one to think about is one called A prime. Is anyone here familiar with the area under the ROC curve? Yeah. So, put kind of at a conceptual level, A prime, you take all the board students, you put them in a jar. You take all the non-board students, you put them in a jar. You take one student out of each jar, what is the probability you can tell which is which? So because you're taking one out of each jar, it doesn't pay attention to how many is in each jar. So it ignores the fact that there's going to be imbalance, because stuff like boredom is going to be 5% of the time. 50%, because you're taking one out of each jar, will be chance. 100% will be perfect. First level medical diagnostics will be around 0.8. Typically people will use a test for medical diagnostics if they don't have a better alternative when it gets to 0.75 or 0.8. Ebola. Nope, there are no published papers on the diagnostic metrics of the current Ebola tests. There clearly are results on it, but they're not published. But just from looking at the number of false negatives we've had with various folks, you can tell that current Ebola tests are probably a little under this level. I point that out to kind of give you an anchor to understand how the numbers are going to be a little later. So we validate the models. Again, we spent a lot of time on this part. So we don't just take the models, build them, and run. We say, okay, we're going to build the models on some students, test them on completely new students, see if they still work. We're going to take some of the content, build the models on some content, test on new content, see if it works on new content. That way we can use it the whole year, because we don't have a whole year worth of data from the field observations. And population level validation. We're going to build the model on populations, test on whole new populations to make sure our models are going to generalize beyond the group we use them. I'll give some details about that in a minute. We've built these models for a whole slew of systems. Those of you who are familiar with Reasoning Mind, we've done a lot of work with Reasoning Mind. We won't be talking about it today. I'll talk about our work with assessments because it's our most mature work. So assessments is that math homework system I showed earlier. Students solve math problems, and if they get it wrong, the system breaks the math problem down into steps, trying to help them build up the answer, and it gives context-sensitive hints. It's used by over 50,000 kids a year. This is not really the right representation to see it, but mostly in Massachusetts and Maine. Those are by far the two biggest places. The state of Maine currently has a thing where actually every single school in the state of Maine is participating in a randomized control trial, every middle school. Half of them are in the experimental, half of them are in the control, and they're assigning at the whole school level. So that's a pretty big RCT. Can't get much bigger. Well, you can get bigger than a whole state because Maine's a small state, but still. Leads to better learning than traditional homework or traditional classroom practice. Closes gaps in student learning. We collected 3,600 observations. Yeah, it's a lot of work, right? That was weeks of me or a graduate student or a postdoc going out there with our phone. You really want to get an optimized process when you're collecting 3,600 observations. 505 students, 6 schools, urban, suburban, and rural. Schools in Worcester, Mass., which is the second largest city in New England. Worcester's like the same size as I think Abilene or something. It's not like a big, big city. Suburban schools between Worcester and Boston. Worcester and Boston are the same distance as they're 30 miles apart, so they're really pretty close. And rural students in rural Maine. Rural Maine kind of, the northern parts of Maine, we're talking the same level of rural as Crockett, Texas, but much smaller. Very low per capita income to average income. How good are our models? They vary in quality. Off-task behavior model and gaming model, we're talking the same level of quality as first-line medical diagnostics. Some of the other models like boredom, frustration, and gauge concentration, a little lower, but still able to tell bored from non-bored about 60% of the time, which is about 22% better than chance. It's the Kappa statistic. So how good is this? Clearly, you would not want, based on our boredom detector, to give someone an injection of penicillin. But at the same time, you would do pretty well in Vegas on those odds.